I'm a retired librarian, working in music libraries mostly, and now a composer and historical researcher. I'm particularly drawn to the theme of music as a sacred language, or the language of nature, as it's been handed down through the centuries. When did musicians stop believing that they were working with a sacred mystery? Did they ever? Long ago, over 50 years ago, I began to see the world as music. What I mean is that I realized that music could have the same meaning, to be the same experience as, let's say, a place. Think of a place that means something to you. It's made up of many things. Nature in many forms, human touches. It may have a story attached to it. And it's happening. It's there. You are there. You are part of it. Part of the performance. It's as if music and that place have the same hidden music within them. How can this be? In my 20s, I got to know a bit about esoteric things, a vague idea of Plato, a touch of Ficino. Yes, the world could have a divine mystery within it, traces of Plato's divine ideas, which might lead us to contemplate the one or truth. Good, but for me, it's the music itself, with all its light and dark and imperfections, which moves us, has meaning and value. The individual work, not just the Platonic ideas buried within it. There is a universal harmony that allows this to be, but it's music that reveals the divine. It's not generally known, outside a small number of people fascinated by this very niche subject, that the Franciscans, from St. Francis himself, had a keen interest in music, and with it in the workings of imagination, and that through them certain esoteric and even magical traditions passed into the post-Reformation world in surprising places. As a composer, I see these ideas as a tradition that can be as true and inspiring today. Everyone's heard of St. Francis of Assisi, preaching to the birds, for instance, but the real Francis and the real tradition was forgotten even in Franciscan circles until the end of the last century, and it's only now being rediscovered. Born in 1181, Francis of Assisi was the son of a wealthy cloth merchant. He went off to be a knight in the wars between the Italian city-states. He had terrible experiences of war and a long, appalling imprisonment. After this, he gave everything away and devoted himself to Christ and Lady Poverty. He lived an extreme Christ-like life. Poverty, love for all creation. With extraordinary speed, he gathered many followers, including, during his lifetime, intellectuals, particularly from England, theologians and scientists. This was the beginning of modern science, people like Roger Bacon. Truth must lead to God. It was a new beginning and perhaps an embarrassment for the church, which was rich and corrupt. The early Franciscans sought wisdom in what was known then of Platonic philosophy. They had close links with Islamic philosophy, including the theory of imagination as a way to define reality. In the Renaissance, the Franciscan Francesco Giorgi entered deeply into the world of Jewish Kabbalah. And always there was music, a sign of the divine in nature. And of course, the desire to be Christ-like, which is also the desire to be in harmony with creation. It seems to me that to be a composer must demand study and experience of creation far more than an understanding of musical technique, or our music might be soulless. In Franciscan terms, the study of music can't be separated from the imitation of Christ, knowing God in every aspect of ourselves and creation. These ideas were always orthodox, not heretical. The greatest Franciscan theologian of the 13th century was Saint Bonaventure, later known as the Seraphic Doctor. Bonaventure justified Francis's ideas to the intellectual scholars. He was influenced by the Eastern Greek theology and tried to reconcile East and West. But within 100 years, the Franciscan vision began to be put aside as the theology of Thomas Aquinas became dominant. Just one difference between Bonaventure and Aquinas. Bonaventure argued that love was superior to intellect, not the other way round, as Aquinas thought. Bonaventure also feared the growing influence of Aristotle, again, the threat of intellect raised above love. Love is always the key. In the Reformation, the Roman Church became more narrow in its ideas, and the Franciscan tradition was suppressed in effect, with vital texts hidden away until the 20th century, and a misleading romantic vision of St. Francis was promoted. But the knowledge of the sacred nature of music was carried on into surprising places. To understand the Franciscan tradition, we have to start by looking at the world, or creation, as the ancient and medieval world saw it. This was common knowledge, but I'll use Franciscan sources to explain it. And I'll begin at Assisi. The tiny church of Santa Maria degli Angeli, St. Mary of the Angels, is the place where St. Francis began his mission and where he died. Later, a great Baroque church was built over it to accommodate pilgrims. Here, in this sacred heart of Franciscan history, we see Francis presenting Mary with roses from the garden at Maria degli Angeli. And around her is an orchestra and choir of angels, in vivid colours, playing flutes, trumpets, viols, guitars, bagpipes, instruments that weren't acceptable in church, but can be played in heaven. But what music do the angels play? It's an immensely important question, and there is an answer. The angels' music is the mind of God. It's all the music there ever could be. We strain to hear it, or perhaps to remember it. It's far above any music of the spheres. It's the pattern of everything. Music is the pattern of everything. Everything is made of music. This would have been understood in Francis's day. The angels play music in heaven, but in creation, harmony communicates or translates the divine music into the language of our lower world, where everything is guided by harmony. Bonaventure's The Soul's Journey into God is a mystical masterpiece which examines how we find God in creation and in our own souls, and finally, God beyond all things, beyond the cloud of unknowing. In the first part, God in creation, Bonaventure explains that there are three worlds: our physical world, the celestial world of the stars and planets, which is harmony itself, and the super-celestial heavens, where the angels play. The person who considers creation, he says, sees that some things are changeable and corruptible, as are earthly bodies. Others are changeable and incorruptible, as are heavenly bodies, the stars and planets. From this, he realizes that other things are unchangeable and incorruptible, as are super-celestial realities, the angels. And we all have the same pattern in our own souls. He says, this world, which is called the macrocosm, enters our soul, which is called the smaller world, or microcosm. And everything is formed according to harmony. Bonaventure refers to St. Augustine, who, he says, indicates the differences of numbers or harmonies, which ascend step by step from sensible things to the maker of all, so that God may be seen in all things. This harmony, then, is the law by which everything can form freely in our world. It's easiest, perhaps, to think of harmony as the first made thing, not exactly a blueprint for creation, but the rules of the game. Everything is formed through harmony. Everything reveals God. As Bonaventure says, whoever does not praise God because of all these effects is dumb. Whoever does not discover the first principle from such clear signs is a fool. This theology of harmony reaffirms an ancient understanding. The first temple of the Hebrews was a model of the universe. Philo, a contemporary of Jesus, wrote of the lamp in the temple. The lamp, too, was placed to the south of the altar of incense, and by it were shown the motions of the 7 planets that perform their revolutions towards the south. For 3 branches rose on either side of the lamp, and lights on them, since also the sun, like the lamp, set in the midst of all the planets, dispenses with a kind of divine music to those above and to those below. The world was sustained by the music of the temple, voices and instruments joining with the angels. The angels sang and played in the highest world above the stars, but we joined them in the temple worship when we sang the threefold Sanctus. And listen, they were heard at the Nativity. The 3 worlds were opening to each other. How could a temple contain the heavens? God was everywhere, and that must mean everywhere, not just this planet. The songs and music of the angels aren't just nice touches in a story, but vital to understanding, because the universe is music. The 9 orders of the angels passed their music down to the celestial spheres, which wove that harmony into this world. It's important to understand that when we think of this cosmos of spheres, the tiny dot at the center is our entire physical world, not what we think of as planet Earth. We know the universe isn't like that, but this symbolic image is still true. This entire cosmos is a symbol of the working of harmony. The 3 worlds, then, the world of the angels outside time, all the music that could ever be, the mind of God, or the divine imagination. Then the celestial spheres, which are the image of harmony, and this physical world, with God far above them all. No, that's not right. In medieval thinking, especially Franciscan, we have to get used to paradox. This is the first of 2 great paradoxes which a Franciscan composer should always remember. In this same book by Bonaventure, he quotes a much older saying: God is an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. At times we might think of those 3 worlds, but we know that they are all everywhere, and God is everywhere and in everything. Both of these are true. The image of God beyond the 3 worlds, and the image of God everywhere and nowhere. In his Tree of Life, Bonaventure gives a series of meditations on the gospel story from creation to the end of things, arranged in 12 sets of 4. He invites us to enter the scenes in imagination. This is a deeply serious spiritual exercise. As our souls are microcosms of all things, we enter into real experience in the imaginal world. The Franciscan use of imagination was not only influenced by Aristotle, but inspired by the sophisticated ideas that were developing in the Islamic world during the Middle Ages. Avicenna's theories of imagination were circulated and commented upon by early Franciscan writers, such as Jean de Rochelle. Bonaventure's use of imagination has been studied by Michel Carnes, and scholar of the esoteric Egil Asprem has suggested that this is the source of Renaissance magical use of imagination. Illustrations of the structure of Bonaventure's Tree of Life were made from at least the 14th century. But I see the structure of the story to reflect both the plan of a great cathedral with the crucifixion at the centre, but also as the form of the cosmos, with the sun as the central sphere. I asked a friend to make this illustration, which also has the shape of a Kabbalistic tree of life, an image which might postdate Bonaventure. This is my own interpretation, but any work which follows the shape of the cosmos must also have a musical meaning. Each part of the Tree of Life seems to match the appropriate planetary modes. This is not at all fanciful. It's inevitable. The Tree of Life can provide images which match the ethos or effect of the modes. What's important here is that this is an illustration of the idea that the structure of harmony is, because we are microcosms, a structure of the soul or imagination as well as the cosmos. This is what creation was like and still is, but in the 12th and 13th century, a thrilling new understanding developed, nurtured by the Victorine order and flowering into abundant life with the Franciscans, though the influence went both ways. This isn't a creation driven by necessity, as Plato once suggested, or an endless, unchanging machine, as Aristotle thought. All things exist and are formed by love. This was a theology of the Trinity, which the Franciscans took from the previous generation of theologians. God, mysteriously, is absolute simplicity and unity, and yet God is also relationship and love, and through love pours out all of creation as a continuous performance, endlessly creative, never detached from its source. Creation has freedom. All things are drawn by love to unity, to be what they are, to reveal God. The Spirit inspires and creation dances, and all things are guided by harmony. We have to remember both these dimensions. Without love, creation might be a machine driven by necessity. Without harmony, we might begin to imagine a God who controls everything rather than delights in freedom. This is why music is so important to the Franciscan tradition. It's not just a symbol of how creation works, it's the language of creation. There's a story that St. Francis used to dance and sing and accompany himself on an imaginary fiddle. This isn't a joke, it's deadly serious. He is being creation. His famous Canticle of the Sun, or Canticle of the Creatures, is a song. Theology becomes praise. We praise together. The canticle is completely inclusive. Francis praises God with brother sun, sister moon, and the stars, the signs of God's harmony, and with the things that have an affinity with the four elements, which harmony forms from formless matter or chaos. Brother wind, sister water, brother fire, sister our mother earth, and sister death. Music is central to the Franciscan movement from Francis himself. Some simple stories are deeply significant. Thomas of Celano tells the story of the angel musician. This is a very early story, as authentic as can be. It's in Bonaventure's Life of St. Francis too. When Francis was very ill at Rieti, he asked to hear the music of a new lute he had heard of. As instrumental music was disapproved of by the church, his friends refused to arrange for a musician to come and play to him. So instead, an angel came down and appeared to Francis at his bedside and played the lute to him. What stands out here is that this is instrumental music, music itself without words, that has value, healing powers, because of its divine origins, the language of creation. A well-known story of St. Clare, St. Francis's friend and the founder of the Second Franciscan Order, the Poor Clares, has a musical significance. Clare's order was enclosed, devoted to prayer. Clare was ill and wished she could attend the service at the new basilica, the great church in memory of Francis at Assisi. And at once she began to hear the organ and the responsories and all the office of the friars in the church of St. Francis, as though she were present there. She could hear the organ. There was instrumental music as well as the choir. This story of Clare's vision is the reason why she's patron saint of television. Already in Clare's lifetime, there was the Franciscan composer, Julian of Speyer, writing music and poetry for the liturgy of the basilica. The music you hear is Julian's liturgy for Francis adapted for St. Clare. Julian's music was part of a decorative scheme embracing all the arts. He was one of the first to compose polyphonic music, music in parts rather than monophonic or in unison. Julian's musical liturgies had an influence on Catholic liturgy for centuries. He was careful to use different musical modes to suit the meaning of the words. Julian's book of music theory is lost, but it's likely that the same ideas are in a slightly later textbook by the Spanish Franciscan Juan Gil de Zamora. I suspect that Marsilio Ficino, who famously used planetary modes for healing, was following a much older tradition. This is a complicated subject. It needs a talk of its own. But church music used 8 different scales, all subtly different. Each one had a different mood or quality, as if divine harmony was about feeling or affect, not just abstract number. For centuries, these modes were associated with the planets that matched the keynote of the scale. The mode on E matched Mars and was heard to be angry and stimulating. This might echo the ancient Greek Phrygian mode, but musically, these modes had nothing to do with ancient Greek music. But there's a mystery here. The musical modes derive from the musical scale which reflects the harmonies of the order of the planetary spheres. But there's something more than number and musical harmony. It's as if they're a series of archetypal qualities which can also be present in anything and in us, as in astrology, and are also the musical scales. They're part of the hidden music, as if they flow in many forms from some uncreated harmony beyond our world. I say, as if. Historian of Franciscan music Peter V. Lowen explains the centrality of music in medieval Franciscan study, particularly in England. And he says that a musicus had the capacity to explain the phenomenon of beauty in the sciences, the natural causes of and reasons behind the motions of concord and discord that could explain relationships between objects and people. The ancient Hermetic text, the Asclepius, puts it, music is nothing other than to know the order of all things. The English Franciscans also made a special study of astrology. There are records of a Franciscan astrologer at work half a mile from where I sit now. Two great Franciscans of the Renaissance, a mystic and a theorist, Francesco Giorgi and Josepho Zarlino, both Venetians, ensured that the Franciscan musical vision would survive in unexpected places when the Roman Church was becoming increasingly Aristotelian and the idea of God speaking through nature was being questioned by certain reformers. Francesco Giorgi was a leading Franciscan intellectual, preacher, and mystic in Renaissance Venice. His close relationship with Jewish scholars led to him being consulted about the annulment of Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, which they supported. He published his 1,000-page Harmony of the World in 1525. This explores every facet of a world in which music is in all things and all things seek to be conformed to Christ. Giorgi writes of the three worlds as described by Bonaventure: angelic, celestial, and the physical world of nature. The angels perform the highest music. The celestial world has its lower music, led by the sirens of Plato's myth of who communicate the angelic music to this world. He writes, but there are symphonies which are no less signs of heaven, such as those, as Plato tells, are presided over by the various sirens, who are said to be singers to God, who, placed in the firmament, make its influences harmonious. For Giorgi, everything in this world is part of the one great symphony. Some things echo the particular harmonies or archetypal qualities of particular planets. He discusses in great detail which flowers belong to Venus or the moon, or perfumes and gems to Jupiter. Giorgi writes of simple Platonic numbers and trinities, but he warns against too great a concern for number. His harmony is more about these archetypal qualities, which can be seen as planets or orders of angels. Though Giorgi is not a magician, this is the world of the natural magic of the great Dominican Platonist Marsilio Ficino, in which worldly things can be made more harmonious through song. His works were never censored by the Church in his lifetime, And when they were, it was for his arguments against original sin or in favor of universal salvation rather than for magic. God is unity, and everything has unity within. Georgie writes that the true one is God. Now he creates them in their multiplicity of species. Now he assembles them all into a single inventive idea. And thus, by enfolding them all with the principle from which they emanated, he drives and draws them to unity. Creation is being composed. Things are constantly being drawn together to form new works. The word, or love, draws all things to unity. George's hope was that the three worlds could sing in harmony as three voices in a motet or anthem have their own music but make a harmonious whole. The separate parts, he says, do not enter with the same notes, yet come together in the same consonants. Thus the three worlds, which, we say, have their different notes, come together in the same harmony. Ultimately, he says, we will sing perfect and harmonious songs, so God grants, because we will sing in the highest together with the angels. Georgie studied Jewish Kabbalah deeply. His book includes Kabbalistic imaginative meditations. Georgie is a medium through which Christian Kabbalah and the esoteric use of imagination passed into France and England. This is a clear continuation of the use of imagination we find in Bonaventure. Josepho Zarlino was also a Venetian. He published his Le Istituzioni Harmonicae in 1558. Zarlino's influence is felt, whether we realize it or not, in every kind of music in the Western tradition to the present day. He was the first to speak of major and minor, and he advocated equal temperament, so we could play music that moved from one key to another. There's another great mystery here, that harmony can still work when some of the tunings are approximate, as if there's a higher silent harmony which number tries to imitate. Zarlino firmly believed in the divine origin of harmony, and that the various musical modes communicated these archetypal qualities, or moods, feelings, ideas that were inherent in creation. Music itself had meaning. Zarlino was incensed when Vincenzo Galilei suggested that performers in early opera could learn how to communicate the passions from the acting styles of commedia dell'arte. To Zarlino, this was an affront to music, which had its own language. He wrote, "What he actually wishes is to reduce music greatly in dignity and reputation. What has the musician to do with those buffoons reciting in vulgar commedia dell'arte?" Zarlino explains the traditional working of the musical cosmos in chapter 6 of his Instituzioni Harmonicae. The heavenly music, he writes, is not only that harmony which is known to exist among things seen and known in the heavens, but is also included in the linkings of the elements and the changing of the seasons. It is, I say, seen and known in the heavens from the revolutions, distances, and placements of the heavenly spheres, as well from the aspect, nature, and position of the 7 planets. The Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But no reason will better convince us that the world is established by harmony than that its very soul is harmony, as Plato says. And the human soul, as we know from Bonaventure, is a microcosm. Zarlino has a clearly Franciscan view of creation emanating from God through music. Zarlino added 4 more modes to the old 8 used by the Church. These are, in effect, 2 each for what we think of now as major and minor scales. These hadn't been used by the Church, perhaps seeming too worldly or due to the complexities of tuning. I suspect Zarlino's 12 represent the 8 celestial spheres and the 4 elements, which are also formed by harmony. Zarlino defines the affects of the modes. These are hard to pin down. Each mode has several faces, as it were. He describes the mode on F, often called the Lydian, but these modes are not the same as the ancient Greek modes, as a mode which brings modesty, happiness, and relief from annoying cares to the spirit, to be used for words that deal with victory. It is joyous, modest, and pleasing. This echoes the 13th century Franciscan Juan Gil de Zamora, himself copying older sources, who describes this mode as modest and delightful, cheering the sad and softening the anxious, calling back the fallen and hopeless. This mode, think of C major with an F sharp instead of an F natural, is the mode of Jupiter. In this case, the effect is easy to demonstrate and to associate with its planet. Modes are really melodic patterns. As music changed in the Baroque period to be based more on what we might see as chordal harmony, influenced by instrumental music, his full system of 12 modes was gradually forgotten, but it did have some influence. The French Huguenot composer Claude Lejeune, who died in 1600, used Zarlino's classification to give structure to a collection of psalms, dodecachord, in 1598. And for a setting of 8-line poems on the vanities of the world. Both works contain 12 pieces, following the order of Zarlino's 12 modes. Lejeune is supporting Zarlino's belief in the affects of the modes. Each work, therefore, aims to encompass the full range of feeling. It's as if the 12 modes represent all possible affects or moods or archetypes. Richard Friedman calls the set of 12 modes a constellation of ideal forms against which a process of spiritual reflection is staged. Lejeune was a member of an academy in Paris at the end of the 16th century, founded by the poet Jean-Antoine de Baïf and composer Joachim Thibaut de Corville. Georgi was an influence on the Paris Academy. His De Harmonia Mundi, Harmony of the World, had been published in a French translation by Baïf's friend Guy Lefebvre de la Bauderie in 1578. The philosopher of the Academy was Pontus de Teilhard. Teilhard, a Catholic priest, believed that the proper Platonic music would restore the soul and bring peace to a world broken by religious conflict. His work drew on all the ancient musical writers and also Francesco Giorgi. Lejeune composed settings of Baïf's poetry using Zarlino's constellation of 12 modes. Francis Yates and Gary Tomlinson argue that some of these chansons were thought of by their creators as a secret and esoteric art form, magical in their intention, aiming to influence the world by drawing down divine influences and to bring peace to the religious divisions of late 16th century France under Henry IV. For Giorgi and Zarlino, music's power was sacred and its meaning came from the harmony in all things. Through Giorgi and Zarlino, Franciscan musical tradition flowed into unexpected places. Giorgi's influence can be found in Calvinist France and Puritan England. There's no better writer on this divine harmony than Peter Sterry, once Oliver Cromwell's chaplain. Zarlino's influence can be found on musicians in Lutheran Germany. Yet the Franciscan vision of a divine musical universe and much of the more radical implications of St. Francis's ministry was vanishing into the shadows in the Roman Church. And yet musicians and composers within the Franciscan order carried the mystery into the 17th and 18th centuries. These included Giovanni Buonamente, director of Musica to Sisi, Ludovico Viardani, an important composer of sacred music, and Antonio Cesti, a Franciscan priest and composer of operas with words by the artist Salvatore Rosa. An influential Franciscan theorist and teacher in the 18th century was Francesco Antonio Vallotti, who worked for many years at the Basilica of St. Anthony in Padua. St. Anthony had been one of the first followers of St. Francis and was known for his inspired preaching. His audience could understand his message even if they did not understand his language. The violinist and composer Giuseppe Tartini studied music at Assisi and played violin solos at the Basilica of St. Anthony at Padua in place of a sermon, his inspired music imitating the miraculous communication of the saint's words. Though Franciscan music teaching continued, notably with Padre Martini, a teacher of Mozart, Tartini is the last of the more mystical tradition. He was too obsessed with mathematical complications, but he was inspired by the idea that music came from the divine order of nature. He believed that the true musica secondo natura, music according to nature, must be simple. The most affecting music might be folk song. In some way, the music itself could communicate the meaning of words. He would inscribe his violin solos with poetry and code, the hidden message of the music. Tartini corresponded with the polymath Count Algarotti about the principle of synesthesia, that music could be experienced as color, as another aspect of universal harmony. By this time, the idea of universal harmony was in the air again, encouraged by readers of Sir Isaac Newton, or more likely, Algarotti's popular book explaining Newton's philosophy for the use of the ladies. Newton suggested colour might follow the same laws as musical harmony. Algarotti imagined a music of colour. He wrote, "The concords of a piece of purple and scarlet will raise the passions of love, pity, courage, or anger in our souls." Tartini's English follower, Benjamin Stillingfleet, wrote in his commentary on Tartini's treatise on harmony that the Pythagoreans supposed the universe itself and all its parts to be formed by the principles of harmony, nor do I imagine they meant only to make use of a figurative expression. There are traces of the harmonic principle scattered up and down sufficient to make us look on it as one of the great and defining principles of the inanimate world. Certain as this harmonious coincidence has now become, till Sir Isaac Newton demonstrated the laws of gravitation in relation to the planets, it must have passed for the dream of an utopian philosopher. It might seem surprising that the idea of the hidden music of nature should be taken up by followers of Newton, but in England it was, which is another story. As a quick recapitulation, these are some key points which I think come out of the Franciscan musical tradition. Music is an essential aspect of Franciscan tradition. The ancient cosmos is an image of harmony. The orbits of the planets seen from Earth mysteriously appear to match the proportions of the diatonic scale, but harmony comes first. The mystery of harmony is the key to ancient religious tradition. The modes are also archetypal qualities which can be found in any facet of nature and the soul. Understanding pre-Reformation Christianity depends on understanding the ancient view of the cosmos. Creation is guided by harmony. Harmony provides the rules of the game, but the performance is free. Zarlino writes that music is necessary for the Christian inasmuch as in knowledge of it is found beatitude. Wherefore I dare to say that those who are not knowledgeable in this sense have to be numbered among the ignorant. And here's the second great paradox. In this world, harmony is imperfect. Without inaccuracies, there would be no life. Everything would stand still. It's this that gives tension and feeling and makes creation move. Georgie warns that whoever wishes to know the harmony in the soul should not aim his industry toward the goal of mathematical speculations. The angels might have perfect harmony, but in this world it's the imperfections that are the grit to the oyster, the cause of pleasure and pain, and keep the performance going. Western classical music since the 17th century depends on not being perfectly in tune to allow it to move between keys, to create contrast and drama. Other traditions express emotion through the tension of notes that are not quite perfect, microtones, or simply slightly bent. A work that's imperfect, discordant, incomplete can fill us with a knowledge of harmony. Such a work or a person, even the most discordant or inept, can fill us with a sense of its uniqueness. The great Franciscan Duns Scotus coined the term quiddity or thisness, the individual nature of a thing which, by being itself, reveals the being and unity of God, which is fortunate for all of us.